So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the Passive House Alliance Chicago chapter. A little bit about this month's presentation. It's all about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and how it affects the Phius, the Passive House Institute of the U.S. Building Standard. So Isaac Elnecave, we have today. Isaac joined the Passive House Institute of the U.S. Certification Team in 2019. He provides advisory services. He works very closely with the submitting CPHC and submitting team to provide feedback on questions pertaining to energy modeling and building plans. He also assists with those in many cases. Prior to joining Phius, Isaac worked as a policy manager, really focused on adoption of the latest building energy codes, which me talking to him, he has exciting news for what's happening in city of Chicago, in Illinois as well. But that might be for another time. Isaac also worked as a civil engineer. He has his bachelor's degree in engineering mechanics from Columbia University School of Engineering and Applied Science, as well as his master's in public policy from University of California, Los Angeles. And I'll pass it off to Isaac. Thank you so much for being here, and really excited for you to host this session.
Thanks, Curtis. I assume that everybody can hear me. Nod your head, thank you. As Curtis said, my name is Isaac Elnecave. I am with Phius. I do both the certification work and policy work at Phius here at the world headquarters here in Chicago. And today, and I've spoken before on kind of some of the policy initiatives that we've been doing at Phius, both in Chicago, in Illinois, and across the country. The Inflation Reduction Act was not part of the original strategic thinking we had at the beginning of the year. But it is now here. It was passed, whether surprisingly or not, and it is a very, very, very large bill with a lot of stuff in it, and some of it really reflects and really affects Phius and our ability to really spur the construction of more Phius projects. And this is really what I want to start talking about. This is, again, the bill passed in August. It is very early in the process. I want to have the purpose is to start getting the information out here. There will be a lot more to be talked about in the coming months and years on this. This is a very long-term effort, and it is, in fact, and I want to say this, it's very exciting, and there's really a lot here that we can tap into. So my purpose is to briefly describe how some of the provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act complement our efforts to get more Phius projects built. And I'm emphasizing the word some. The bill when it was written was something like 800 pages long. We're going to be talking about tax credits, among other things, and I'm going to be talking even just a small proportion of the tax credits. Again, this is really meant to make it straightforward and simple, and to think about how it reflects on Phius. There's a lot of people spending a lot of time getting all of the details, but that's how I want to emphasize it. So why aren't more Phius projects built? That's always a question we ask ourselves. Phius projects are better quality. They save tons of energy, generally 40 to 60% more than code. They produce a healthier building in terms of air quality, among other things. And they really are the cutting edge of building technology. I mean, there really should be no, I feel like we should be having lots and lots of Phius projects built. And obviously, while we're having some, and it's been accelerating, it's not been as much as I'd like. And some of the reasons are the following. It is harder to build a Phius project than a code project. And it's harder to design, it's harder to build. There is some unfamiliarity with the standards, with the standard itself, and with the building techniques revolving around the standard. There is some unfamiliarity with the technologies involved, such as energy recovery ventilators, heat pump hot water heaters, and the like. And there's also just the general conservatism of the construction industry that does tend to often resist change and advancement. But who are we kidding? It's really cost. That's why everybody tends to shy away. That's why a lot of people tend to shy away. There is an incremental cost to building to Phius versus code. It's not as much as people think, and there will be other discussions that we will have that will get into this much more detail. But when I talk to people and I say, why aren't we building more? That's, you know, that's number one. That's the first two reasons that I'm given: cost. So really, part of the effort that we're working for within the policy discussion is how to ameliorate the cost issue. Because all those other issues that I talked about, they can certainly be overcome. Usually it's just a matter of getting projects built and getting comfort with the standard itself. We just got to get people to be less not focused, but less worried about the cost issue. This is where the IRA is going to be very, very important. Again, what this webinar is not about. The vast majority of the IRA. I'm not going to be talking, and I'm sure you're going to be thankful that I'm not going to be talking about things dealing with the pharmaceutical industry. That's not what this is about. And there's discussions about clean transportation. There's discussions about other aspects like carbon. This is going to be about how this bill reflects on Phius. So if you are interested, I will say this: if you are interested in getting a much more broad understanding of the legislation, I would suggest you go to Rewiring America and their website. They have some very good information that will get into much more detail on the bill. But today we're going to keep it we're going to keep it tightly focused. So here are the topics I want to really be talking about. There are 3 tax credits that are of very significant importance: 45L tax credits, the 179D tax credits. And by the way, as you saw from my introduction, I am not an accountant. So this stuff, I've been taking a crash course on learning all this as well. There is the renewable energy credit. So we're going to be talking about those 3 specific tax credits as we're as we move forward. And then I'm going to talk somewhat about energy code support, which is going to be very important. And I'll tie that back in with the work that's happening in Illinois and Chicago. And that's going to be very important. And I think within the context of Phius Alliance Chicago, this is going to, I think, is going to provide us with a lot of direction as to some of the work that we want to be thinking about and doing within, again, the next few months and probably in the next couple of years. So these are the issues I'm going to be covering. The key issue to think about is that the tax credits have either been amended or extended. And that the energy code support builds on the previous work. If anybody remembers, there was another major energy bill that passed last year called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. That also incorporated energy code support. And this bill builds on that. So let me talk about the 45L tax credit. The 45L tax credit has been in effect, I believe, since about 2005 with an older piece of legislation called the EPACT. It was, however, based on energy savings above code. In other words, you would get a tax credit if you could show that your home, your single family or your multifamily was a certain percentage above what's called the 2006 International Energy Construction Code. That's a fairly complicated way to figure out the tax credit. So this legislation has now simplified it. And the way that it's simplified it is that it's now tied it into either Energy Star for either single family or multifamily new construction, or Department of Energy Zero Energy Ready Home Program. And it's really straightforward. For single family, if you build to Energy Star level and get certified as an Energy Star, and I think the key issue here is making sure that you're certified to Energy Star, you get the builder will receive $2,500 in tax credits, which we always hope will be passed through to the customer. If you build to the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home Program, which I will add incorporates Energy Star, a builder will receive a $5,000 tax credit. So this is a fairly significant amount in terms of what a single family costs. Both Energy Star and DOE Zero Energy Ready are what are called above code programs, in that they do require you to go beyond code, and they are very well known as not just improving energy, but improving quality of building construction. Now, for multifamily buildings, there's two separate. If you are building it, I guess what's called non-prevailing wage, and as I point out down here, prevailing wage is determined at the state level. You and your units meet the Energy Star requirement. You will receive a tax credit of $500 per unit. If you do it at DOE Zero Energy, you will get $1,000 per unit. Those numbers become $2,500 and $5,000 if they're being built under prevailing wage guidelines, basically in terms of labor. So what you're looking at is if you're building non-prevailing wage multifamily, and you build a 50 unit, and you build 50 units, and you can get DOE Zero Energy Ready Home certification, you're going to get a tax credit of $50,000. If you do it to prevailing wage, you get $250,000. And again, what you need is the Energy Star or the DOE ZERH, Zero Energy Ready Home certification. So what does that mean? And by the way, just as a small point, the Energy Star version that is being used in a given state does differ. There is different versions. So you have to make sure that you meet the Energy Star version here in Illinois. That's being used here in Illinois. So what's the connection to Phius? More or less since 2015, Phius has required that all eligible projects certify, and I mean eligible because it requires certify under Energy Star, Zero Energy Ready Home, and Indoor Air Plus. And I add, by the way, I add Indoor Air Plus because Indoor Air Plus is one of the requirements of the Zero Energy Ready Home program. So Phius has, over the last several years, required that all their projects, whether certainly all the single family and all the multifamilies that are eligible, typically projects under 5 stories, meet those certifications. So now what we're saying is, if you build a 5-story multifamily and you get the Phius certification, when you get the Phius certification, to have accomplished that, you would have had to get the Zero Energy Ready Home certification as part of your process. That means that a Phius building has ZERH as part of it, and you are now eligible for the tax credit. More or less, the federal government catching up to what Phius has been asking for several years. A couple of caveats that I always like to make sure. There are rules, and you have to be kind of aware of them. The kind of 2 rules I want to emphasize is that a property must be transferred for the 45L credit to apply. In other words, somebody basically has to sell the project. I mean, the project has to transfer ownership. And as I noted, not all projects are eligible for the zero energy ready home. Although all projects will always be, projects are all projects are eligible for Energy Star, but not all are eligible for ZERH. There are height guidelines. But all of that said, you do a Phius multifamily or single family, by definition, you will qualify for the 45L tax credit, one way or another. So
Isaac, hi, this is Lindsay. One thing I wanted to ask if you've gotten clarity on this, because we haven't. Right now, the old 45L went up to 3 stories, but zero energy ready homes is now up for 5 stories. And so we've been trying to get clarity on whether or not 4 and 5 story zero energy ready homes projects can get this or not, or if it would fall under 179D. Have you received any other, because I can't even get Energy Star to answer that.
Yeah, no, it's going to be 5. I believe it's going to be 5 stories, because it's going to be, it's tied to the ZERH certification. It's not tied to ASHRAE at this point, or IECC.
No, but the 179D is for 4 stories and above. And the old 45L was only for projects up to 3 stories.
Right.
So, and you have to use the ERI path for zero energy ready homes. You can't use ASHRAE.
Yeah. But I believe that it's still, I believe that 5-story homes are going to be, but I will follow up on that and get full confirmation on that point.
Awesome. You'll be one of my best friends if you can get that.
All right.
Thank you.
So now that Lindsay mentioned it, let's go forward to 179D. And 179D is going to apply more or less to commercial buildings, those commercial buildings that are tied to ASHRAE, as well. And now they've added with the new law that you can build on tax exempt entities and still receive this tax credit. So you can build on tribal, if you build on tribal lands. They had government buildings before, and you can include other things such as private schools, religious organizations, and universities, and you can still be eligible for the tax credit. By the way, private schools, religious organizations, and universities is not the full list, but I wanted to give you a sense that they've expanded where the types of buildings that you can build that include this tax exempt, that are now available and eligible for the tax credit. Now 179D is different, and it's unlike 45L, which shifted from a percentage better than code to a certification. 179D stays roughly the same way. They just changed how far you have to go, or how well, or how much better you have to be. So let me go over that as well. So in 179D, you have to be 25% below the ASHRAE 90.1, and it has to be the version 4 years prior to the date where the building is occupied. So it will typically be ASHRAE 90.1 2019 for a while. And you have to be better, basically think about it this way. You have a building, you build it to ASHRAE 90.1 2019. It gives you an energy score. It gives you an energy level. And for example, an EUI. You then have to do 25% better than that in your design to get to be eligible for the tax credit. And again, much like 45L, there's a non-prevailing wage and a prevailing wage. You do non-prevailing wage, it starts at 50 cents a square foot. You then add 2 cents for every 1% improvement. So let's give the example. If you go to 30% better than ASHRAE 90.1, you're now at 60 cents a square foot, up to a maximum of $1 per square foot. If you do prevailing wage, It starts at $250. You add 10 cents a square foot for every additional 1%, and it goes to a maximum of $5 a square foot. So in a prevailing wage state, if you go almost effectively to 50% below ASHRAE 90.1, you can get as much as $5 a square foot in tax credits. So that's a significantly larger number than was available. The difference here, unlike 45L, where you either have to achieve an Energy Star certification or a Zero Energy Ready Home certification, in this case, you have to show the improvement. So the question then becomes how? You have to do it 25% better than below ASHRAE 90.1. And then you have to use what is called IRS, what basically IRS or DOE approved software. Unfortunately, WFI Passive is not approved at this point, but you can use RemRate, Ecotrope, MicroPass, Energy Pro, or Energy Gauge to show the energy savings. Those are the approved softwares. Our connection to Phius in this case is that the energy use of Phius 2021 projects easily will meet the minimum requirement and actually will often hit the maximum amount. So if you build a commercial project to the Phius standard, and by the way, I said Phius 2021, and that's a oversight on the previous one. The other one is as well, Phius 2021 is projects for 45L. But if you build to the Phius 2021, you will have access to the tax credit. The only caveat is that you will have to use some type of one of these approved softwares to show it. So it is a little bit of extra work. So that is the 179D. Finally, there is 25D. Trust me, and by the way, it took me a long time to get all these numbers straight in my head. That's basically the clean energy tax credit. There's a lot of them, but there's two that really show up that are, I think, important from a Phius perspective. One, qualified solar electric property expenditure, and qualified battery storage technology. You do either one of those, you get a 30% tax credit. And then how does that kind of connect back to Phius? If you're thinking of doing a Phius Zero project, you will almost, the vast majority of the time, you will put in PV. And so now you can get a tax credit for achieving the energy efficiency of your commercial or residential or multifamily project from either 45L or 179D. And then you will get a tax credit for putting up the PV. So you can basically get it, if you will, a tax credit coming or going. And so as I think one of the ways I would like to have you picture it is that these tax credits are part of a broad, comprehensive picture of what you can do within a Phius project. So now let me move over to energy code support. One of the Phius policy buckets that we really work hard on is incorporating Phius into energy codes, state and local energy codes. Typically, we've done it as what's called an alternate compliance path, basically saying that if you get Phius certification, you are deemed compliant with the code in that jurisdiction. There are some places where this is going further. If you go to Massachusetts is going to make Phius and all make passive house code for multifamily buildings. And in New York State, they are doing something fairly similar. So either Phius will be with RA made code, or it is an alternate compliance path. So in this legislation, they have put in, and always these numbers, federal legislation always amuses me because the numbers that are incorporated in terms of money are so massive that I often have trouble even getting my head around it. but they are providing $330 million in energy code support for meeting the 2021 IECC. And these are focused as grants to assist states and local municipalities to adopt the code and implement a plan to achieve full compliance. And that 330 million is tied to the 2021 or the latest version of the IECC. As you can see on the third bullet, it builds on $225 million from the infrastructure bill last year. And it's important, and one of the key parts is because that bill passed last year, that's already moved forward in its implementation phase, and DOE is already getting information on how to actually start working with states and municipalities on energy code support. So that 330 million really is going to build on that 225 million. So there you have 555 million for 2021 IECC, which is the latest model code, which is an excellent code, but there's this $670 million in energy code support for zero energy codes. So if you are a state or local municipality and you are trying to adopt zero energy codes and implement a plan to achieve full compliance with zero energy codes, you are then have access to the $670 million that the DOE will make available. And that's where Phius starts becoming very important. As I noted, Phius is part of a number of codes in a number of states and municipalities. Very importantly, Phius will be included in the next version of the Illinois State Code. Phius will be included in the first version of the Illinois Stretch Code, which will come out sometime next year. And Phius is also part of the I believe recently adopted Chicago Transformational Energy Code. So there is, the state and the city are going to have to, have adopted these codes, but they are going to have to implement them. There's going to be a lot of work that's going to go into having to train building officials, among other people, but building officials, construction of professionals, raters, and the like, on how to achieve compliance with zero energy codes. And Phius can apply as a zero energy code. In fact, it is seen as that in places like Massachusetts and New York. So since the state and the city have, what I said, an alternate compliance path for Phius, this money, I mean, obviously not all 670 million, but some chunk of this can be part of efforts between either Chicago and Phius or the state and Phius in terms of things such as training, information, third-party enforcement, and the like, to make sure that Phius becomes an important part of the codes infrastructure in the state. So I wanted to make sure that, and as you can imagine, there's going to be lots of places that are going to be working on getting some of this money, but it is 670 million. So we can hope that everybody can, we can all share part of this. So back to my original point, cost. As you can see, part of what this IRA has been doing is really ameliorating and kind of lessening the effect of the incremental costs that we often see within the context of Phius. So let me go over what this all means. Let me see if I want to bring this together. Illinois and Chicago have instituted several policies that can potentially increase the number of Phius projects. And we've been working on these over the last 2 to 3 years. ComEd has an incentive program for Phius. The Illinois Housing Development Authority, in their latest low-income housing tax credit, added both Phius Core and Phius Zero as part of their tax credit and gave it significant number of points. As I mentioned, Phius is now part of the Illinois Energy Code, the base code and the stretch code, and it is part of the new Chicago Code. All of these policies, as you can see, are focused, among other things, on reducing this burden, this cost burden that people talk about. And it does it in both directly in terms of tax credits and incentives, but it also helps to reduce cost by increasing the expertise within the construction community for building the Phius. Sometimes the first try at building the Phius can be difficult, and there's a cost involved. But as people get more comfortable doing it, the cost comes down. We've seen this in places like Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York. We've seen it in a number of places where, as the expertise and the construction infrastructure increases, the cost itself goes down. The IRA, by incorporating these tax credits that do apply to Phius in a very direct manner, will hopefully accelerate this process. And that's really what I would, as we're talking about this, and as we've talked as Phius related professionals, I want to start having us talk about how the IRA, as part of when we were talking about Phius, we can talk about how the IRA and the tax credits, the 45L for single and multifamily, 179D for commercial, can really help, if not inspire, but it can help make developers, builders, and possible consumers, homeowners more comfortable. One final point. These tax credits, the 45L, the 179, the 25, can be stacked, right? At least very specifically, these can be stacked with the low-income housing tax credit. So if you're doing a low-income housing tax credit project and you get tax credits and you're awarded tax credits by the Illinois Housing Development Authority, the IRA tax credit comes on top of that. It does not bite into it. It might be stacked on top of incentives. We still haven't gotten that point determined. And I think we'll hopefully be in other discussions, we can start talking about electrification rebates, in that this legislation includes rebates for electrification, both directly in terms of like heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, but also in terms of improving the wiring in your house or improving the capacity of your panel. So finally, we're going to be working on doing more research on other aspects of the IRA. Like I said, we've only really just begun touching it. We're going to be talking about retrofits. We're going to be researching retrofits, these equipment rebates and how they apply, the broader electrification question that is aimed within this legislation, and its efforts to reduce carbon. So I will leave you with this. Our future work, I believe, from a Phius perspective, is to make sure builders and developers connect these tax credits and the Illinois policies that we've been working on with Phius, so that they see a strong, comprehensive story around this. And with that, I'm happy to take Q&A. My name again is Isaac Elnecave. I'm a policy specialist at Phius, and if you want to contact me, that's my email.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Isaac. There are some questions in the chat. So we'll open the floor to questions in a minute, but first I want to respect those who put questions in the chat. And first round of questions, and I have one myself as well, are on 45L, the tax credit for energy efficient new homes. So the question is, if a homeowner renovates their home without changing ownership, are they not eligible for this tax credit?
That was my caveat. Probably. I don't have a definitive answer, but from my discussions with other people who have been involved in the 45L work, the answer would be that yes, or excuse me, no, you would not be eligible for 45L. There has to be some type of property transfer. Okay. I think a way to think about it is that, for example, if a developer builds a subdivision, they would certainly be eligible for the tax credit. Or if a builder themselves builds a house and then sells it to a homeowner, that there would be eligibility for that. But if you own it, if you own the land and you have a builder build it for you, I believe that the answer would not, that you would not be eligible for the 45L single family.
Okay, that was another question in the chat as well. So should a builder do a development of Energy Star homes, who receives the tax credit? Is that a builder tax credit or the future home buyer?
Builder.
Okay,
Is my understanding.
all right.
Now, the idea, hopefully, and what I've heard in the past from work, that is that you often have the builder pass through the cost to the homeowner, so that there's a reduction in the cost that way, but it goes to the builder.
Okay. Can any existing home built before, say, 2012 receive an Energy Star rating, or it's okay?
And you can build, and you can receive a ZERH rating. I mean, the issue really becomes that, and there is a whole retrofit section in this legislation. So that should be coming, because that's a very large issue within itself. But the issue is, if you're renovating or you're doing retrofits, it's obviously harder to hit these Energy Star and ZERH certifications, and it's certainly harder to hit Phius. I'm sure I'm not saying anything that nobody doesn't understand, knows this at this point, but you can do it. And it certainly, there's no reason, it just simply says you get Energy Star certification or you get ZERH certification. And we've done projects. Phius has done. There have been projects in Chicago, in fact, that have received the Phius certification. But it's not for the faint of heart.
Any other questions that we might have? So the 670 million, is this available to municipalities and states only? So if it's for development of codes, like, do you see development of, different types of net zero energy codes and standards? Is this a yes and yes?
I'm giving you a lot of yeses here. Yes. I think, I wasn't there in the discussion, so I don't know, but I know that, there's two, again, they separated it out very specifically. They have a set of $330 million. I often say 330 billion by mistake. I'm sure it's just my own Freudian slips, but $330 million for the 2021 IECC, which is the current model code right now, in which number of states have been adopting, and a number of municipalities. Chicago itself just adopted the 2021 IECC, and the city of Illinois will, the state of Michigan will. So the 330 million is there for the IECC 2021. That 670 million is for really, a lot of it is going to be experimentation. What kinds of codes are going to be, what does a net zero code mean? There's all kinds of definitions, up to and including net zero energy versus net zero carbon. There's full electrification codes. There's any number of different approaches that you can use, including Phius. Phius can absolutely function as a net zero energy code. But I think the adoption isn't one thing, but the real game changer here is the implementation of these energy codes. Because, as you just implied, these codes are going to be new. They're going to be different. They're not going to be familiar. But people are familiar in the construction industry. People are familiar with the International Energy Construction Code. Whether they like it or not, they're familiar with it. They know what its structure is. They know how to. In many ways, they know how to implement it, and they know how to get it in. Build to it, and code officials know how to enforce it. I will note that the 2021 is kind of a reasonably significant upgrade, so there is going to be a learning curve there, but it's the same structure. When you move to net zero codes, as I said, there's going to be all kinds of different ways. So people are going to have to start learning new paradigms on how to enforce this. So building officials will need to understand what are the ways that it can be enforced. Can it be enforced through a third party? Or will they do it themselves? What do they need to look for? So there's going to be a very significant learning curve and training that's going to be involved in this. And it's going to be, and you know, not to soft soap this, it's going to take a while. And we have to think about this from a fairly long-term perspective. That's why it's $670 million, right? But if a municipality or a state is willing to go here, right? And again, Chicago, for example, says if you build a Phius, it's deemed compliant. That gives you an opening to start working with code officials and so that they can recognize what Phius means. It's the same thing across the state. So this is a real opportunity to experiment and to take advantage of learning and training when the cost issue is ameliorated because of these grants to the states.
Great, Isaac. Well, thanks so much. Again, please check out passivehousechicago.org, and we're always looking for participation and potential topics to cover on our monthly meetings. So please email us at info@passivehousechicago.org or reach out to any of the board members on this call.